This video is sponsored by Chepeku tokens, more on them later. Greetings gamers, I'm Anto, and this is a video I've been promising to make for a while now. One of the most common things that you hear about 5th edition is that encounter building rules don't work, they're broken, and the CR system is a mess. It's a sentiment so passive that I'm guilty of it myself in the past. I have talked a lot in the past about how much I hate the challenge rating system. But since I started running 5e again earlier this year, I decided to dive back into the rules and follow them to the letter. And since I've been doing that, I've had no trouble with encounter building. Turns out when you actually read the rules and follow them, they work. So how do people think the rules work? When we speak to most folks in the 5e space or see most of the discussions surrounding encounter building in 5e, you're going to see two main lines of conversation around it. The first is that people are using CR, or the challenge rating of monsters, as the foundation of the way that they build their encounters. And the second is that people bring up the fact that the DMG mentions that you should be running 6 to 8 medium encounters per day. Now we're going to start with that latter point. Page 84 of the 2014 DMG does make a reference to the typical adventuring day being the equivalent of 6 to 8 medium encounters, but it's doing this in the context of the rules presented on the preceding 3.5 pages, and even then it's only given as a rough guide. In fact, if we look back at the D&D Next playtest, we can see that there was supposed to be an additional paragraph of text here that made it explicitly clear that the 6 encounter adventuring day was a generalization and only a rough guideline to help you keep in mind that the PCs would need to rest eventually, and it was not a hard and fast rule. I think if this paragraph had been published in the 2014 DMG, then we wouldn't have had a decade of arguments about this, to be honest. But when you look at most of the discussions around creating encounters in 5e, the thing that makes it really clear that most folks aren't using the proper rules is that so many of them are only using the challenge rating as their benchmark for building an encounter. Challenge rating, like encounters per day, is a rough guideline to give you a quick idea of the power level of an individual monster in relation to another monster. Now, when you build in encounters, CR is useful and important to a degree, but it's actually the XP and the number of combatants that's way more important for building out an actually balanced encounter. So a lot of people will look at a monster like the adult red dragon and think this will be a suitable encounter for 4 level 17 characters, but then they're surprised that their players have no trouble defeating the dragon. But when you use the correct encounter building rules, you can see that the dragon is only a medium encounter for 4 characters, and it's an easy encounter as soon as you have 5. Throw in a few more magic items than the PC should have access to, or play the dragon with poor tactics, and of course the PCs are going to stomp it. I want to take a time out for a sec here to say that I'm not blaming people for not reading the rules here. I do think a big part of the blame is the way that Wizards present them. Obviously, if the DMG had been better laid out in 2014 and the information was better presented, people would have been doing this properly. This isn't a,
oh, the players, the dungeon masters are the whole problem.
Absolutely, the layout of the book is the root of the problem here, but the information is there if you wade through how poorly it is laid out. The actual rules. So we've talked about how people think the encounters are built and why that's wrong. So what's the right way? Well, starting on page 81 of the 2014 DMG, you're going to find a couple pages of information which is focused all around XP. Each character has an XP budget depending on their level, and when all of these are added together, you get your total XP budget for your party for that adventuring day. There's also a similar table which tells you what the XP budget for a character is depending on the difficulty of the encounter, so your easy, your medium, your difficult, that kind of thing. And this is where the 6 to 8 encounters a day comes from, by dividing that total daily XP budget by the medium encounter budget. As an example, we'll use a party of 4 level 5 adventurers. Each gets a daily XP budget of 3,500 XP, giving us a total XP budget for the party of 14,000 for an adventuring day. A medium encounter is worth 2,000 XP, so we could potentially fit 7 medium encounters into that adventuring day for that party. But we know that in most situations, we're just not running that many encounters in a day before the PCs get to long rest. So the simplest solution is to run harder encounters. I know, groundbreaking stuff, right? Exactly the kind of stuff that you should click the shiny subscribe button below for. We've got several ways that we can do this depending on the adventure, and you definitely want to change it up from time to time to keep things fresh. But a model that I've found works really well to use is this sequence of encounters in an adventuring day. The Deadly Opener, the hard center, and the Wildcard. So let's go over each of those elements in turn and talk about what our goals are for them. This video is sponsored by Chepeku tokens. For years now, Chepeku have been bringing beautiful handcrafted battle maps and scenes to game tables, and now they're launching Cheipeku tokens. This new service will allow you to bring a near infinite variety of monsters, player characters, and NPC tokens to your game, so you never need to go trawling through Google looking for a token for Hobgoblin number 7 ever again. There's a token building tool that allows you to mix and match elements to create your perfect token, ideal for making player tokens or special boss monsters, but when it's 5 minutes to game night and you need a dozen minions, the token randomizer has got your back. Cheipeku tokens are available right now, and if you sign up before the start of September, you're going to get a massive 67% discount on the Gallant Ranger subscription tier, so head to the link in the description below to check it out, and thanks again to Cheipeku for supporting the channel. The Deadly Opener. In this example, we're assuming that you're starting an adventuring day with the player characters at full health, with all their abilities and all of their spells. Now this is important because resource management is the name of the game with the Deadly Opener. A big part of the reason why 5e encounters feel so easy is because too often PCs are going into an encounter with almost all of their resources or all of their resources available to use, allowing them to go Nova and use all of their cool abilities without restriction. Now, knowing this, we want to design our opening encounter to focus more on resource drain. So you might build out an encounter to include lots of low-level enemies that can bunch together and encourage casters to use their AoE spells, for example. Or you might put a few brutes in front of your PCs, sort of tough enemies with resistances that encourage the party to use up some of those more limited resources. Or you might throw out a couple of hard-hitting strikers designed to do massive single attack damage to the PCs and take big chunks of their health from full to encourage some healing resource drain. Now, all of your standard encounter building design rules should apply here. There should be narrative goals, the environment should be interesting and interactable, and you should introduce some non-combat resolution options and objectives to make everything all the better. But when the dice start rolling, this first encounter of the day should be deadly on paper with a focus on resource drain. The Hard Center. Fresh off their victory against the Deadly Opener, your players should have the impression that this is going to be a tough day. Exactly the kind of feeling that someone who lives their life on the road adventuring should have. The casters will hopefully have burned through a few spell slots, maybe some potions might have been consumed. You might have even rattled some of the players enough for them to want to take a short rest. Now, if your party composition has multiple characters that rely on short rests to regain their abilities, and they're already tapped out at this point, you might consider it, but otherwise I really encourage you to create a situation where there's not enough time or safety for a short rest between these first two encounters, so it encourages more resource drain and a more difficult combat. And that brings us to the Hard Center. This is a hard difficulty encounter where I usually opt to go for a smaller number of hard-hitting enemies or one big nasty with a squad of underleveled mobs to run interference. This is the encounter that's going to dictate your session, the adventuring day, and maybe even the entire adventure itself. I typically find that if a player character is going to go down to death saves, this is the encounter where it starts to happen. There's a common misconception that it's too hard for PCs to die in 5e, and if you're only ever running medium encounters, then that probably is going to be true. But running fewer, more difficult encounters is much more deadly, and it makes for more dramatic gameplay, I think. Now, a neat trick that you can do for this central encounter is actually make it into two distinct medium encounters mechanically, and then have them overlap. You start with one medium encounter and then bring in reinforcements or a hazard or some other medium encounter, and in doing so push this into the hard encounter bracket in terms of its XP value. But this can have great results as the PC try and deal with the problem on multiple fronts. Maybe you split the party off by dropping a portcullis between them, or some other natural terrain feature splits them up. Maybe you split them by having multiple objectives and two medium encounters in two locations. But getting these two distinct encounters that overlap can really elevate the stakes of this encounter without actually making it more mechanically difficult in terms of the XP, but it will feel a lot more difficult to the players. Now, if your players do poorly in this encounter, they're almost certainly going to try and short rest if they can following it, and the upcoming final encounter will be less difficult. If they manage to make it through the Hard Center with their health and abilities mostly intact, I would say don't let them have the opportunity for a rest before the next encounter, because it's going to trivialize it a little bit. But if they are really hurting and they're mostly tapped out, a short rest will help them survive that last encounter. The Wildcard. Our last encounter in this condensed adventuring day is the Wildcard, and we call it that because what you deploy here is going to depend on how the rest of the adventuring day has gone. Your XP budget should allow for you to use a deadly encounter here without much issue, but especially if your PCs aren't used to a more punishing cadence of combat, this can throw them off and they can spiral into a TPK the first time you do it real easy. Now, what you do during the Wildcard encounter is also going to depend on how the previous encounters have gone for the PCs. If they're still packed with spells and ability, then you can use your remaining XP budget without fear and let the PCs fend for themselves. But if they're coming to this last encounter spent with barely a fireball left in the tank, maybe consider downgrading it to a hard encounter. This flexibility in the encounter is usually really easy to justify in world, a few extra colors here, a second brute monster there, and you can massage the XP value of the encounter wherever you need it to be. I do have a word of caution here though. There is a temptation to use just one boss monster for your climactic end battles, but you need to be really careful about doing this. Using our level 5 example from before, if we had a deadly opener and a hard center made up of 2 stacked medium encounters, we would have enough XP left over in our budget to afford a CR9 monster, which would be perfectly capable of killing a level 5 character from full HP in a single turn. It's much better to use a boss monster at 1 level above the party's level and then top up the XP budget with lower level minions who can run interference. Now, to make all of this math easier, I highly encourage you to use the encounter builder on D&D Beyond. With a free account, you're able to build encounters with every monster available in every book. You can't see their stats if you don't own the content, but you can see the monster in its CR and its XP, which is all you really need for this part of the encounter building process. Alternatively, you can use Cobble Fight Club, which does the same job and has an option for generating encounters based on difficulty and the style of encounter that you want, such as a horde or a boss with minions. But I'll be honest, I really don't like this feature as it skews to making much more difficult encounters than it should. If you choose a hard encounter on Cobble Fight Club, for example, it will regularly produce an insanely deadly encounter. And it often builds encounters with more than a dozen monsters, which just isn't to my taste. I find it bogs down play too much, but have a play around with the builder and see if you enjoy it. Of course, you can follow all the guidelines and build in XP-based encounters in the world, but if your combats are taking place in a flat, featureless plane, you're still probably going to have a bad time, so make sure to check out this video to learn how to build more exciting combats beyond just the mathematical element, and until next time, happy gaming.